Justin Ford for From the Frontline. Recognizing the successful secession of Somaliland is the topic of tonight's episode. In the studio with me is Dr. Peter Hammond, the founder of Frontline Fellowship, who has been involved in serving persecuted Christians for over 40 years in 38 countries. Good evening, Dr. Hammond. The official recognition by the State of Israel of the secession and independence of Somaliland has stirred up some opposition and controversy. What is the background to this event?
Well, Somaliland has actually been an independent country since 1991. It's not news in one sense because Somalia as a country collapsed into anarchy and has been voted the most failed states. And there's even a book out called Africa's Worst Failed State. And even Operation World states that Somalia is Africa's most failed state, which is quite an achievement because there's a lot of failed states in Africa, but Somalia is the worst. And so Somaliland is a stable, viable country that has seceded from chaos and is operating with its own army, its own police, its own electricity, plumbing, operating with its own roads department. Postal service works, unlike South Africa's. And Somaliland is a viable operational country, and Somalia is a failed state, chaotic shambles of a mess of a war zone in the middle of a civil war. So it's interesting that people have found the recognition of a stable, independent country like Somaliland a problem, but they're not that concerned about Somalia. In fact, just to show you how ridiculous things are, the United Nations has just appointed Somalia as chairman of the Security Council. Now, it's a rotational thing, but no country voted against it. So even the Western countries, even Britain and America, acceded to the idea of Somalia, the chaotic shambles of a failed state, being chairman of the Security Council. Now, I mean, if that's not a farce, what is? That just shows right now the news headlines about the recognition of Somaliland creating controversy. Well, I would have thought it should be more of a controversy that Somalia is given the Security Council to chair when they can't even run their own country.
The government of Somalia protests that this is in violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. But as you said, Somalia appears to be a failed state.
It's certainly a failed state. Most of Somalia is in chaos and shambles. The government of Somalia can't provide electricity, it can't provide plumbing or water, it can't provide a postal service. In fact, the only security in Somalia is in the capital of Mogadishu because international peacekeepers are there to protect enclaves so that the NGOs and the diplomatic embassies people can live in some semblance of a bubble of vague stability and freedom. But Somalia itself has no stability to such an extent that Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda terrorists control most of the land of Somalia. So who's talking about territorial integrity? Al-Shabaab terrorists from Somalia regularly attack Kenya. They've gone in and massacred up to hundreds of people at a time in Kenya. Al-Shabaab terrorists from Somalia have gone in and sometimes stopped buses on the main roads and required people to answer questions from the Quran like, who's the mother of Muhammad? And if they can't answer, they kill him. They've gone into universities and beheaded students in the dormitories. They've blown up churches, burned down churches. In one very famous event a few years ago, in which a South African was the first victim, one of the biggest and most opulent shopping centers in the capital city of Nairobi got taken over by Al-Shabaab terrorists, and the whole thing ended up with the place being looted, destroyed, burned, blown up, and vast amounts of casualties, absolute shambles. So this is the threat to the international stability is not from the stable country of Somaliland, which hasn't had a problem with any of its neighbors. It just trades with its neighbors. But Somalia is a threat to the whole region to such an extent that Kenya has got soldiers operating in Somalia to try and stop the terrorists, to try and attack them. So talk about territorial integrity. There's no integrity to the territory of Somalia itself. It's a shambles. It's an absolute chaotic mess. And speaking about other things, there's no women's rights in Somalia. Do you know 95% of the girls from 11 to 14 have genital mutilation done to them in Somalia? Somalia is one of the worst places in the world for a woman to live. And the amount of murders of women, stoning to death of women, things like this, domestic violence where they beat the wife to death and things like that. So Somalia is so bad. Do you know 8%, officially, 8% of the children born in Somalia die in childhood. So it's one of the worst on every level you can give. Somalia is a failed state.
The African Union claims that recognition of Somaliland's independence would be destabilizing to the African Union and a threat to the cohesion of other countries. Is that a valid concern?
Not at all. The African Union is being super hypocritical because the history is at independence, got to go back a bit further. Before the Second World War, there was Somaliland was run by the British. Somaliland was British Somaliland. That's the north of Somalia, which today is called independent Somaliland. And then the south was Italian Somaliland. And in 1960, after the Second World War, the United Nations took over the Italian Somaliland, and later British gave independence to the British Somaliland, and the UN worked to join the two together, Somaliland, the old British Somaliland, and Somalia, the old Italian Somali. And bad idea, just like the Versailles Treaty creating Yugoslavia was a catastrophe after the First World War, and Yugoslavia doesn't exist today because it was a bad idea, and it wasn't facing demographic realities. Somaliland is different. It has British traditions. Somalia is super different because it's got Italian background and, of course, more Catholic influence and so on. And Somalia is 99.9% Muslim. Somalia is officially an Islamic state. You've got jihadists going from one side to the other, murdering people, going berserk. The last church in Somalia was destroyed in 1991. The last minister in Somalia was murdered in 1993, just before the Americans went in. And it is a complete chaotic shambles. There's no religious freedom, there's no security, there's no safety. The threat to cohesion of other countries is from this failed state of Somalia, which is a base for Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab, who are attacking their neighbors and murdering civilians and causing havoc and chaos. Not to mention the piracy problem, where Somalian pirates have threatened international trade, maritime travel and trade, because they're near the crucial choke point of the Gulf of Aden and the Suez Canal, which is a seriously busy maritime area of operation. And so the African Union had no problem recognizing the independence of Eritrea. Now, before the Second World War, Eritrea was Italian and it was run separately, but the British and the South Africans liberated Eritrea. And at the end of the end of the Second World War, Eritrea and Abyssinia were forced into a new country called Ethiopia. And, of course, Eritrea fought for years after that to gain independence. But Eritrea's independence was recognized. Well, why would Somaliland's independence not be recognized in the same way as Eritrea's? It's just reverting back to the pre-Second World War, pre-United Nations forced joining. And the African Union recognized Eritrea's independence, and African Union even recognized South Sudan's independence. So how then can they make a big thing like Somaliland would be a problem when there's lots of precedents to show that there's no reason why this should not be recognized. Just take, for example, Southwest Africa, which had been German Southwest Africa and then was conquered by South Africa in the First World War, and it became a part of South Africa. And then later, in 1990, Southwest Africa was separated from South Africa and made an independent country, Namibia. Well, if you can recognize Namibia and Eritrea and South Sudan, why can't you recognize Somaliland? So, no, Somaliland's not a threat to any stability and cohesion of any other country, but Somalia certainly is a threat to the stability of the whole Horn of Africa region and even international maritime traffic. So this is awfully selective and ignorant protest from the African Union.
Why do you think they're protesting this?
Well, I'm sure they're just corrupt as hell and listening to the globalists. The globalists don't want independent movements. The globalists want messed up, unfunctioning states. They like failed states. That gives the globalists more power. Whereas independent, self-governing countries that can feed themselves are considered a threat to the globalist agenda. I think the African Union is nothing but an adjunct to the globalist agenda.
News reports claim that Israel is the first and only country to recognize the independence of Somalia. Is that true?
No, it isn't, because first and foremost, the United Arab Emirates also recognized Somaliland, although they didn't make a statement about it, but they have functionally recognized them. Britain has diplomatic relations with Somaliland and trade. Ethiopia has regular trade with Somaliland as well. Of course, they're neighbors, very important neighbors. And then Taiwan, Republic of China, they have recognized Somaliland. So, okay, I understand that Taiwan is claimed by China, but de facto, Taiwan is an independent country. And so to say that Israel is the first and only country to recognize it is not actually true. It may not be very helpful to Somaliland to have found an advocate in Israel. Now, you can understand Israel is looking for friends, and they've lost a lot of friends recently. And it may not be that much of a recommendation when you have a country involved in a very controversial war, being accused of genocide in the International Court of Justice, and many people being horrified over the destruction of not just Gaza and Gazans, but even churches in Gaza. And so maybe the Israeli recognition of Somaliland is muddying the waters for Somaliland, but I think they're grateful for any aid and trade. Well, they're not getting any aid, but they are getting some trade. And it's understandable that Israel would want a friend in the Middle East, and they even said Somaliland's willing to sign the Abrahamic Accords, which is nice and positive. But I think the United Arab Emirates and Ethiopia are more viable neighbors, or close neighbors in the case of the United Arab Emirates. Ethiopia is a direct neighbor, though. Their trade and relations with Somaliland predates all of this.
What do we know about the history of Somaliland?
Well, in the Bible we read about the land of Put, a major trading center, but the British took northern Somalia, what today is called Somaliland, and it was called British Somaliland, and the Italians took south of Somaliland, which today is called Somalia. And so historically, they are quite viable countries, at least Somaliland was, and the British put a lot of effort into it. It's a super strategic country because of bordering on the Gulf of Aden, which is a very important naval and maritime travel area. So it's strategic territory. And we know that the British had imbibed certain standards and values in Somaliland in the north, which made it more open to being a democratic country. Somaliland's had viable regular elections, and recently the incumbent lost the election and handed over to the new president who had won the recent election. So Somaliland's a functioning democracy, which is much more than you can say for most of Africa, and certainly more than you can say for the failed state of Somalia. And of course the Italians had their own influence. So you can see while there's quite a bit of Orthodox Christians scattered among Somalia and Somaliland, the south, the Italian section, had the Roman Catholic Church coming in, whereas the north had some Protestant influence, and there are very few Christians in the area. There's only a few thousand in Somalia itself. They officially, according to Operation World, there's only about 1,000 Christians in Somalia, and there's 4,000 underground Christians in Somalia, Operation World estimates. Somaliland has got much more than that, maybe up to 10,000 Christians in Somaliland. Interestingly, there's a religious toleration in Somaliland. There's no religious freedom in Somalia. Before the American troops came in 1993 into Mogadishu, the Somalis had just destroyed the last church, killed the last minister, And so Somalia is a death zone for Christians, so much so that we know that in the last year, 5 Christians or Muslims who converted to Christianity were stoned to death in Somalia. And we've seen these pictures of men, Somali men, buried up to their waist in the ground and then stoned to death by jihadists wearing these face masks and scarves. And but the Muslim jihadists have posted these pictures before, during, and after of stoning to death Muslims who convert to Christianity in Somalia. And that's how lawless the country is, and that's their contempt for the rights of local people. So anyone talking about territorial integrity and sovereignty obviously don't know what's going on in Somalia.
Is Somaliland the new breakaway country? Is that a viable country?
It is. They've got effective elections. They can even have handover of power to the opposition when the government loses the elections, as just happened last year. And they've got their own functioning military and police and post office. They have electricity, they have plumbing, they have schools, and they have effective trade. Somaliland's trading with Ethiopia, it's trading with the United Arab Emirates, even with Taiwan, even with Britain, although Britain has not officially recognized them, but they've got diplomatic relations between them. So it's kind of like de facto they've recognized them, but they've avoided making a statement which could get the kind of hysteria that we've just seen take place now. So yes, Somaliland is a viable country. It's got very few tourists, but it's open to tourists, and some tourists have reported back on what a pleasant experience it was going to Somaliland and how safe they felt, from people who'd been to Somalia before and saying, Somalia is chaos and a disaster area and bring your own infrastructure, versus Somaliland, where you can actually get a very good deal for pretty low prices. They've got their own currency, and the exchange rate's very advantageous to visitors. So yes, from everything we can tell, Somaliland is viable, as opposed to Somalia, which definitely is not.
Why should listeners be interested in what happens in Somaliland?
Well, first of all, because we should want stability, and we should be concerned for the church, and the church obviously cannot grow in Somalia. So, for example, just in 1977, a Bible in Somali was produced. But this cannot be distributed or imported into Somalia. The Bible is forbidden in Somalia, and the only way you can get Bibles distributed in the Somali language is outside of Somalia. But there are millions of Somalis who fled outside the country and are found in Ethiopia and Kenya and other parts of the world, and most notably, it seems, also in Minnesota in the United States. So if we should be concerned, because in Somaliland we can still do some missionary work, whereas you can't do any in Somalia itself, not unless you've got a death wish and want to be a martyr. So yeah, we should also be concerned about what happens to Somaliland, is because there are other secession movements like the Cape of Good Hope seeking to secede from the failed state of South Africa as well, and the recognition of Somaliland's independence would go a long way to helping other secession movements, such as Alberta and the Cape of Good Hope, who are pushing forward towards self-determination in our countries.
Yeah, you just referenced Somalians in America. They're in the news over the healthcare and daycare scandal in Minnesota. What's actually involved in that controversy?
Well, it's billions and billions of rand stolen. In fact, it's been estimated by some Americans that the theft of American taxpayers' money in Minnesota by Somalians exceeds the total budget, not just budget, the total economy of Somalia itself. They're stealing billions and billions and billions of US dollars every year from the US taxpayers in fraudulent healthcare and daycare scandals. And some journalists have gone out of their way to go to these myriad of Somali daycare centers in Minnesota and find that some of them are just a shop front in some strip mall, no garden, no play area, no children visible, and so on. And when a man says, I'd like to sign up my child for this daycare center, where's the forms? No, go away, there's no place for you here, and so on. Well, where are the children? Where's the daycare center? Go away. And just shouting at him and swearing at him and so on. And plainly, these daycare centers have been proven to be false. there are entire businesses taking billions of dollars cumulatively from the taxpayer for fraudulent scams. And the Minnesotan governor, Tim Walz, who was the so-called vice president candidate with Kamala Harris in the Democratic ticket for the last elections, which they lost, of course. But he's done nothing about this fraud. The taxpayers in Minnesota are being stolen from by the billions and billions of dollars every year, and the Somalis seem to be at the epicenter of it to such an extent that they've got congressmen speaking up for the Somalis that you must take what you can from America and send it to our people back in Somalia. And so huge amounts of American tax money is ending up back in Somalia itself to fund more warlords and more violence and killing of Christians and stoning to death of converts from Islam and so on, I guess. Not to mention genital mutilation of Somali girls. So this is a mega scandal, phenomenal. And so it seems that the pirates of Somalia have moved to Minnesota. Instead of hijacking ships, they're just hijacking welfare programs that you don't need any legitimate cause or involvement in. And apparently, according to investigative reporters in America who have reported this to, for example, Senator Kennedy, who's been exposing this in the Senate right now, that the Democrats are encouraging the Somalis to do this because that'll get them voters, because the more free things these immigrants get, the more they will vote for the Democrats who will let them get away with it. And don't vote for the Republicans because they'll stop people being able to steal. You know, that sort of idea. So it's a scandal on so many levels, not just the Somalis are doing it, but the Democrats are covering it up, from the governor through congressmen and the police. Remember, Minnesota was the epicenter of the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020, and where they were pushing the defund the police, and where the Minnesota police station downtown Minneapolis was burned down. And you might even remember the CNN reporter standing in front of the burning police station saying that the demonstrations were mostly peaceful. Literally with the burning police station behind. And the police were ordered not to protect the police station, but to let the crowds burn it down. And that came from the governor, the mayor, the whole lot. So it seems the Somalis not only are a failed state in Somalia, but they are making a failed state in Minnesota.
Yeah, some years ago, Somalia was also much in the news over the piracy of international vessels that they were seizing. What led to that international crisis?
Well, I think, first of all, travel on the sea has always been dangerous, and there have been pirates through the centuries. But piracy was ended primarily by the Royal Navy. The British Navy did the most to end piracy on the high seas, and they did it by arming every ship, and every merchant marine, even if they were not Navy, were armed, and the sailors were trained to fight to defend them. So you didn't have even the most commercial ship without cannon and muskets and armed people on board knowing how to use these weapons to defend them, because pirates obviously didn't just attack armed battleships and warships, they attacked unarmed civilian ships. So every civilian ship, every merchant ship was armed, even with cannon. And that's the only way they ended piracy. So the idiocy is somewhere along the line, the United Nations and so on decided to disarm all the ships. So that these ships, some of these ships, as you know, are worth billions of dollars, including the ones that carry these thousands of containers and so on. And the worth of what they're transporting is also valuable, oil tanks, so on. But they disarmed all these ships, so that suddenly it encouraged more piracy, because, you know, a couple of 4 skinny Somali pirates could get in a little boat with an outboard motor and go out and hijack a $5 billion tanker and hold it for ransom or whatever. And this was just too viable. So you encourage piracy when you disarm all of it. It's like if you have a gun-free zone, you disarm all the civilians. Well, that's where criminals can come. And so the idiocy, if anyone of our listeners has ever seen the film Captain Phillips, it's absolutely staggering. you can hardly believe such a big, expensive, valuable vessel with expensive, valuable cargo had nothing to defend itself. The captain was reduced to using hose pipes to try and ward off the little Somali boat with these 4 skinny Somalis who've got a couple of AK-47s between them, and the ship had nothing, not so much as a pistol to defend itself. I mean, one heavy caliber weapon like a 50 cal could have sunk that outboard motor boat that was trying to hijack their vessel and ended the threat before it, because they could see it coming from miles away. And so the Captain Phillips film is so shocking to think that major shipping units can put expensive vessels on the high seas without so much as a single weapon to defend it. It's insane. It's the stupidity of these gun-free crowds and these pacifists. You know, it doesn't matter how much the sheep vote for vegetarianism. It doesn't make any difference if the wolf remains of a different opinion. And so here you've got these pacifists making laws that might work in heaven, but it's not going to work in the real world. And there you've had all these expensive ships sailing past poverty-stricken failed states like Somalia, where about the only thing they've got is AK-47s, thanks to the Soviet Union having dumped vast amounts of weapons there during the Cold War, when they were using this as a staging area for terrorism, first against Ethiopia when it was Christian, and then they turned to support Ethiopia, and Ethiopia became communist under Colonel Mengistu and the Red Terror to attack Somalia. But the Horn of Africa is awash with Soviet weapons from the Cold War, which they now could turn into cash and gold by attacking these disarmed ships. It's just a temptation too great to miss. So it was to think such an international crisis, which could only be solved the way that piracy has always been solved, putting armed people on every ship. And naval units from Europe had to be deployed to the Indian Ocean and to the Gulf of Aden to prevent this happening in the future. And the Russians were the first to show how to sink these vessels and to stop any piracy. And that's the only way you can stop piracy. You've got to sink their vessels and shoot the pirates, hang them later if need be. But that's the only way piracy can ever be dealt with. The only way to stop violence by bad people is to have violence by good people. A bad person with a gun can only be stopped by a good person with a gun. And that's the fact.
When you refer to Somalians in the United States of America and Minnesota, are they Somalians from Somalia or from Somaliland as well?
Well, that's a significant question. Actually, the Somaliland people aren't fleeing. That's the thing. It's such a stable country. They don't have refugees and a diaspora all over the world. The Somalis from Somaliland are happy to stay in Somaliland. It's the Somalis from the failed states of Somalia, the socialist jihadist state where Islam is the state religion and where Christianity is illegal, where Bibles are banned. It's that Somalia that is sending their people all over the world to pirate off Minnesota's daycare system and welfare nonsense and falsehood. You know, they've even got an American congresswoman who married her own brother in order to get him the right to come into the country. And so there's even a meme out there saying, I think we need to see other siblings. So it's like bizarre. This is just criminal. So she's there on false pretenses, and she got a brother there on false pretenses, which means they're not legitimate citizens of America because it comes from false declarations at the border. And in Congress, this Somalia has said again and again, she's there to represent the interest of her country, Somalia. Now, how can you have a congressman in the United States Congress whose allegiance is to anything other than to the United States of America? And they fly Somali flags in Minnesota, and that is the failed state of Somalia. And they literally send most of their money back home. So the economy in Somalia is being run by money being shipped back to, which might not even be earned. It might be money stolen, or it might be money that's come from some fake welfare claimant. So this is just extraordinary. You can see a failed state destabilizes more than its own country. The countries that receive those recipients become failed states themselves. You can't import people from a failed state without disastrous consequences.
Where can listeners learn more about Somalia and Somaliland, Dr. Hammond?
Well, in the popular media, watch the film Black Hawk Down and the film Captain Phillips, and you'll get an idea about what a failed state Somalia is, what a violent place it is. If you want facts, you go to Operation World. They've got a chapter on every country in the world, including Somalia. And I would say those are the most helpful ways of learning. You can also praise God for the few missionaries who are in the area. There are not a lot of missionaries in the country, but praise God, in northern Nigeria, you get some Christian ministries involved. For example, there is the Wycliffe Bible Translators and SIM, the Transworld Radio is broadcasting into Somalia and Somaliland, and we can learn from them if we are supporting those ministries too. But the Bible is available in the Somali language, so the Bible Society can also help somewhat on that. If you've seen Black Hawk Down or Captain Phillips, you'll know a lot more about the country from the popular media.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hammond. In closing, I'd like to read from 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 22. The king's ships went to the land of Punt. They brought gold, silver, ivory, apes, and baboons. Thank you very much for joining us for From the Frontline. God bless and good night.